So, what would be the thumbnail case for Christians if you were just to take them to their Bible and say, look, there's at least some obvious evidence that nations are a thing that God cares about? Where would be some touch points that you would take them in their Bibles?
I think that the place to start is with the fact that ancient Israel, through the writings of its prophets, self-describes as a nation, as a people. So we have to think about, what does that mean? But the fact that the story from Genesis through Kings, and then the great prophetic writings and scholarly writings after that, the fact that that Israel is not described as a faith; it's described as an am, which is a people, or a goy, which means a nation, or Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, which is referring to Israel as an alliance of families who are who share a common descent, that they have converts, but in general, it's a nation or a people. And so the Old Testament gives us the framework for thinking about the history of the world, not in terms of cities, like the great Greek philosophers thought in terms of independent city-states, and not in terms of empires, because the Romans, for example, conceived of of the entire world as being, in principle, something that should be under one scepter. And it's only in Hebrew scripture that Christianity inherits a view of the world as made up of nations, of families that group together as tribes, that group together as nations, and then also families of nations. And that structure gives you a very different kind of politics, because it assumes that your politics and ultimately your religion and your path to God are connected to your inherited traditions that are particular to your family, your tribe, and your nation. So that's definitely where you start. There's a lot more to be said, but that's where you start.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying to me recalls my mind immediately to Genesis 10 and 11, the table of nations, as we call it, and then Babel, where you have kind of like this famous anti-empire, or maybe a proto-anti-empire argument there. What do you think is going on in Genesis 10 with every family, clan, language, with that division of the earth in that way? Why do you think that's placed so prominently in the creation narrative?
Well, it's connected to the Babel story. Obviously, the issue is that at the beginning of Genesis, in fact, all through Genesis and maybe beyond, but at least in the beginning of Genesis, the way the story's written, it's God finding out stage after stage various unpleasant things about human beings who He's created. And in excuse me, in the story of Noah, he gets so tired of it he decides he's going to destroy the world. But after Noah, the same pattern continues of God repeatedly discovering various characteristics of human beings that seemingly He hadn't planned for. And the particular human characteristic, like you can say that it's a sin, but it's not clear if it's inherently sinful.
Mm-hmm.
The particular human characteristic that the Babel story focuses on is the desire, lasot lanu shem, to make a name for ourselves. Okay, and this urge of human beings to make a name for themselves in the Babel story is connected with this impulse to gather all of the nations under a single scepter. So you can read these passages two different ways, because there's a question of whether the whether the division of the world into nations and languages, whether that happens before Babel or as a consequence of Babel. So there's two different ways to read it, but either way, the if you read it the first way, then human beings dividing themselves into nations and languages is completely natural to human beings, and you know it's part of the way we're created. It's not 100% clear if the story's telling it, you know, in such a way that you're supposed to think that God meant it in advance or not. But if you read it the first way, it's completely natural to human beings, and the sin of the Tower of Babel is to try to is to try to crush all of that by giving one language, one speech, and one set of ideas. Safachat v'dvarim achadim, one language and one way of seeing things because of one language. So the sin then is to try to crush out the diversity that is part of the natural order. And if you read it the other way, then what happens is that God looks at what happens when human beings try to enforce everybody being one language and one way of seeing things, and God finds it so revolting that he says that's I'm changing reality in order to rejigger. Like from now on, human beings they're going to be split into families and tribes and nations with their own languages and their own way of looking at things. Either reading brings you to a clear biblical reservation about the attempt to arrive at human uniformity, and you know people think that you know the word diversity came into fashion, you know, so like in the 1980s or something. But this whole issue is when you start with by asking what are the political teachings and ramifications of the Bible and Hebrew Scripture. Right there at the beginning is the division into families, tribes, and nations, and and it's clear that God prefers this diversity
Mhm.
and is hostile to the attempt to wipe out diversity.
Yeah, that's a great point that I think I have argued in print, so I'll have to put my view out there that the first view is the best view, that diversity is there, and that one group straggles over into Babel and creates problems there. Um, but that I don't think most people look at these texts, especially Genesis 1 through 11, through the political lens. Now, you're a political philosopher. That's what your original training was. You've certainly escaped that mere moniker. But I don't think most people see that, you know, and I think this is maybe an American problem or maybe a liberal democracy problem, is we read about kings and kingdoms and tribes, and we just go, oh, isn't that cute? Like it's England over there or something. And we don't think of it as like, oh no, this is their political philosophy. This is how they are thinking about the world, or it's certainly influencing their political philosophy.
When you said it's cute, I was thinking, oh, kings and tribes. It's like it's the Lord of the Rings.
Right. It was. I mean, honestly, I think in American Christian culture, I think you get a bit of that. Is there's a
Yeah,
little bit of
it's
romanticizing and waxing on this. Yeah.